Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Sunday Plus. This is a chance for us to platform conversations that have come out of Sunday morning, the topics that got covered, all of those things. My name's Jimmy. I'm one of the pastors here. I've got a round table, well, two round tables of wonderful people here to discuss some of the themes and topics from Sunday. So Pastor Rodney, Pastor Ryan, and then my beautiful wife, Kelly, right here. So thanks for being here, guys.
Yeah, for sure.
We're going to be doing this, hopefully, over this next season. Just we wanted to get together folks who have engaged with the themes that we're dealing with Sunday to Sunday and just process them. Because a lot of times 40 minutes on a Sunday is just not enough time to plunge the depths of all that might be there, apply it in all the different ways. So that's really what we're doing here at Sunday Plus. So great. I'm glad you guys are here. And we are talking about some really easy topics. No problem, really, whatsoever.
And you kind of went for all of them.
I kind of went.
You did.
Yeah, that's right. I got no raise at the end of it, but that's okay. So I wanted us to chase kind of two themes today. The first one is complementarianism. So that's a $3 word right there.
It is.
My phone, by the way, when I type it in, it wants to change it to complementarianism, and it doesn't know what to do.
It's definitely don't. We're not that.
So,
yeah.
No.
So let's just talk about what that is real quick.
Yeah.
And then, Kelly, I'd love to just get some insight from you on it as it touches your life and the life of just women writ large and what that means for them. So when we're talking about complementarianism, we said on Sunday, the sort of short way to talk about it would be to say sameness in worth, difference in role. First off, would you guys want to add color to that? I mean, obviously that's the tightest way to talk about it, but would there be anything else that you would want to put on that before we bat it around?
Yeah, well, I think even right there in the word, and that's where the phrase kind of, or the theological word developed, was out of the idea of complementing. That the complementary nature of what it looks like to be made in the image of God and to be made male and female, they are meant to complement, not compete with one another, and they complement one another by fulfilling and living in and thriving inside of those roles. And I also think it's important to note too that this has been the overwhelming view of the church throughout church history.
That's true.
So that God has created us male and female to live out distinct roles that glorify Him and complement one another. Up until probably about the 19th century was the view of all of the church and has been. So historically speaking, it's also a very rooted and secure theological position.
Yeah, it's a new invention.
Yeah.
And it's probably worth just mentioning, this is not just a word, we're making up and pulling out of, no, it's
Siri
grounded,
thinks it is.
Yeah,
But,
this is grounded in the Bible. So you were preaching on Sunday morning in Genesis 1, and the Lord is making image bearers. And the way He describes image bearers is in that way where they are complementing one another. They are male and female. And both of those are necessary. So I just wanted to say that just to make sure that we are grounding what we're saying in the text of the scriptures. And part of what we see in the opening chapters of the Bible, the very first page, is this sort of way that God has made us to complement one another.
Yeah, that's great.
And I don't think it's a result of the fall either.
Yeah.
I actually think that's an important distinction too, that this is actually God's good design and intention for men and women.
Yeah, so much of the instruction you get between men and women is all Genesis 1 and Genesis 2.
Correct, yeah.
The fall doesn't show up to the third chapter, so yeah. So
the difficulties in it show up in the fall.
That's right.
The complementing to competing, I often think, shows up
That's
there.
a good distinction, yeah. So, Kel, I wanted to ask you about it because I know you've done a lot of thought work about it. You've written about it. You've counseled, in our house, many a wife and about it. And so I wanted to just ask your thoughts. You've, wrestled with and developed like an understanding of it over the years. But I want to hear your thoughts about complementarianism. But more than that, I'd love for you to maybe just help us and folks at home see what about it would be lovely. Because I think on the surface, it can read, and I talked about it a little bit in the sermon, it can read to people, especially women, like it's somehow an under-the-thumb doctrine. or like an oppressive sort of wanting to squelch women's gifts, squelch women's opportunities, that sort of thing. And I don't think there's a better person to talk about it than a woman who's done the thought work on it. So can I just throw it to you and you just say whatever you want about it? So,
Sure.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, I would first want to clarify that when we say sameness and worth difference in role, we're speaking of only two arenas of difference in role, in the home and in the local church. So those are the two arenas. And for me, as a student of the Bible, I find complementarianism in the scriptures, and I find it to be a comfort because from page 1 to the very end, God is very pro-women in very shocking ways, I think. I just read in Numbers yesterday, the Nazirite vow, this vow of being set apart for God in this really distinct way. It says any man or woman who wants to take the vow. So in some really shocking ways, God is elevating women alongside their male counterparts, and he is very pro-women. And so I trust that about God. And so even in the things that I haven't always understood right away, I know I can trust he's good and he's for me, because I see that all throughout the scriptures. And when we look at the things in the home and in the church where a modern woman reads it and goes, oh, so I'm not allowed. We look at what we're not allowed to do. I'm not allowed to be an authority in the home, and I'm not allowed to be an elder. On the church side, I would just say, it's not like every man is allowed to be an elder either, right? It's not like that's like an open door.
Ryan barely made it.
It's close.
It's not like, that's a very narrow door. And one of the things that makes it narrow is gender, but that is not the only thing. It is very narrow there. And that helps me see it's not just about you're a woman, so you're excluded. There are many other men excluded from that position. And actually, I have not felt that it has impeded my ability to do ministry and thrive in any way. If anything, I'm watching you become an elder and go, the weight is heavy. And I'm glad to pray for you. And I'm glad that I don't bear that. And I feel supported at a church of male elders to be pushed out into all the ways that I'm called to do ministry. And as somebody who teaches the scriptures, I don't feel that that's hindered at all by God's role in the church. And then what I would say in the home, I actually want to reference one of my favorite writers about this topic, Elizabeth Elliot, because she made the observation that both men and women have a unique power over one another. That men have strength, physical strength that is stronger than women, and that can be abused in that way. But women we also likewise have power that we can exert over men. And I look at women a lot and say, you know that you can be you can get what you want if you want to, with the right exercise of emotion, timing, nagging, persistence. We have a power. It makes me think of a Big Fat Greek Wedding. The man is the head and the woman is the neck. She can turn the head whichever way she wants. And any wife knows I can do that. And so my role, the roles within the home, Elizabeth Elliot is famous for saying, God calling men to love and women to submit is a way to subdue both of our powers over one another, so that I'm called into submission and it helps me keep that power I have over you in check. The same way you're called to love and serve me keeps your physical strength over me in check to go use that strength to serve. And so even within the home, you can look at it as I don't have the final word, but that doesn't mean I have no voice and no power and no partnership. It means that I'm called to kind of pull back that power I have and submit it to the Lord through my marriage. And that submission is only to you. I'm not called to offer my submission to any other man. Just every man in the world doesn't get my submission, just my husband. And so I have seen that play out in my life as I now have the protection and provision and shepherding and support of men through my husband and my elders to help me flourish. And I think that's what it should be. We should see women flourishing in a complementarian context.
I agree.
You guys want to add anything to that?
One last thing I would say, I do think there's such an important part of the, this is just good old hermeneutics of how we study the Bible and how we learn the Bible. Sometimes our cultural lens or our cultural situation can make it harder for us to understand the context of something. So I think when we think of submission and leadership, we have much more of a Western mindset that can think much more like a business or a corporation where there's an org chart. And what it means is to give orders downward. And I think we actually need to have much more of a grid when we're reading about submission inside of the scriptures of Mark 10:45, where Jesus says, I didn't come to be served, but to serve and to give my life as a ransom for many. And even as Paul spells out what submission is to look like, he says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. So if anything, the leadership is not top-down CEO type leadership that I think we automatically equate and think of, but it's leadership much more of a servant, one who's going to be the first to wash feet and to humble themselves and to repent and to use their strength for the good that others would flourish. So I think we also just need to make sure our mindset is seeing the scriptures rightly and not through our Western lens when it comes to leadership and submission.
Absolutely.
There's a couple of things you said in there too that I think are worth pointing out. You identified yourself sort of on the spectrum of complementarianism, on the softer or more gentle side of it, but there is a spectrum. And I just want to acknowledge that there are some in the complementarian world who would hold that those sort of roles do extend outside of the family and the church. People I love kind of fit into that camp. And there's also those in the camp of complementarianism who would agree with what you just said. And this would be our position, is that the roles would extend to both the home and the church. So I just wanted to note that.
And the end.
Right. And not go beyond that. So I just wanted to say that is kind of our formal position of where we would hold complementarianism, which I think is helpful. And one other thing that I think you said in there that is just so important, like when I think of our church, I think it is on all of our men to create a culture where all of our ladies can really flourish in the giftings that God has given them. And I would hope that any woman in our church would be able to say over time that, gosh, my giftings are being used, that I have space for those giftings to operate. We just want to be so intentional about creating those sort of pathways. And one of the things I love that we're doing in that world is even trying to develop our teaching giftings across our ladies, which I know you and Lindsay help lead. So I wanted to say thanks for that. But again, it's just under that umbrella of like part of what complementarianism is for a man. How can we lay down our life so that the ladies around us can flourish? In our homes, in our church, man, we want to so see that happen across our church family. So,
and I would say, that's happening. Not everybody knows these behind the scenes things, but I remember it's probably 2 or 3 years ago that you guys into the elder meeting asked for 3 of us ladies to come in, and you kind of asked for State of the Union on the women in our church. How are they doing? Are women thriving? How can we serve them more? And to me, that's such a beautiful expression of male eldership in a church that isn't trying to lead with no input from the women in their congregation, but we're actually inviting our input. And I think that's really beautiful and honors the Lord, that complimenting.
I hear you.
Amen.
Well, that was one of the issues that were covered on Sunday. Then it opened the door into homosexuality, came right out of Genesis 1, tied to that text, and transgenderism, which are both obviously really big issues in our current cultural context. Anything else you would want to say from Sunday, Jimmy, when you think about either of those two issues that come to your mind?
I mean, there's so much to say. There was so much I deleted in my manuscript that I was like, well, that would make that sermon 3 hours. But I'm hoping we can platform some of it here. But in the main, I would just hope that the big, E on the eye chart is caught in terms of like what we are saying the Bible teaches in terms of transgenderism, which is that the Bible seems really clear that when you're talking about the borders with respect to gender, that those borders are very narrow. We said that Sunday, that there are 2 genders. They're defined by our biology. We see that from Genesis 1 all the way through Paul, all the way with Jesus and into the eschaton, if you will. And then that's gender. And yet, it seems that the Bible is also equally, but conversely, broad when it talks about how those identities are going to be expressed within a man's life or a woman's life. So, which I think just gives it retaliates against the culture, which I think has posits itself as being so for human flourishing. But when you analyze it, you really discover, that in many ways, culture is the one trying to put us in these tiny boxes that say, well, if you're a man, you have to throw a spiral football and shoot deer every November, right? And what the Bible says is, man, those borders are much more broad when it comes to the expression of that gender, being male or female. So I'm hoping that can actually be a liberating force to some folks who deal with what our culture would call gender dysphoria or things like that. Not every story is the same. We all know that. There's complexity with every person who deals with these issues. But I think for many folks in the trans community or folks dealing with gender dysphoria, we're looking at people who have unfortunately embrace the culture's lie that you have to have all of these preferences or else you're probably a member of the opposite sex and you just didn't know it. And I think the Bible says, no, you can actually be free from that. And you can actually be fully you within these borders, not these borders, as a man or a woman.
And gosh, I think that is such an important parental issue to get square and to see clearly. Especially, I'm just anticipating some that are going to listen or watch this, that you are going to fit in very traditional categories. Maybe you are the mom, and it is all pink and high heels and all the stuff. Or you're a dad, and it's all hunting and all the
Sports.
stuff. And you have a son or a daughter who does not fit into those categories. And I think that is the scenario where not seeing this clearly does so much damage downstream. Like when I think of my two girls, they are very different. One loves the pink and high heels, and one would rather throw the football and be in that world of things. And I think it's just so important that both Laura and I are consistently looking at both of them and saying, these are both great expressions of womanhood. Like, you are a beautiful woman, and you like this, and you are a beautiful woman, and you like that. Both of those are within the boundaries of the Bible.
That's right.
So,
Yeah, and I think, Jimmy, I think a lot of what we're even talking about too is how do we engage with folks as they have these, well, first let me say this. I think every single one of us on this side of the fall are bringing issues of brokenness to sexuality and gender.
That's right.
And I think starting there as just all of us in that same playing field helps so much in the ways that we're going to experience and listen and engage with others across the board. And the good news of the gospel is that it means whether your struggle with gender and sexuality is on the heterosexual side or homosexual side or anywhere in between, that there is hope, that there is good news for our brokenness. So I think like starting from there as a posture helps us a lot, even in these conversations, because these conversations, to Rodney's point, they're coming and they're present for us and they're part of the culture moment that we're living in. And I think that allows us, even as you were saying earlier, to operate with a sense of compassion, but also conviction, to faithfully and clearly say what the Bible says about gender, but also to have pastoral hearts that are willing to listen to people and to love people where they're at, and with the hope and the expectation that we get to share the good news of the gospel with them.
That's right. Another theme I was trying to develop on Sunday was just that idea of authority when it comes to this issue. Like, where are we deriving our borders, boundaries, framework, language, theology, sense of self from? And, a modern Western person is going to ground it in just right in here, right inside the walls of my chest, and just what do I feel about it? What do I think about it? And it is so crucial, I think, for every Christian to just settle the issue today. I derive my sense of everything from the scriptures. What God says and how he decides to frame the issue, what he says is valuable, what he says is lovely, what he says is ugly, what he says is right and wrong, those are going to be my terms too. And, I've often heard it, and I think this is a common argument and I think a wrong-headed argument about the trans issue, and even the homosexual issue is, Jimmy, you are you're calling that person to give up too much. You're calling them to change too much. You're calling them to forfeit too much. I mean, that's their whole life. It's their whole identity. And there's a good chance, maybe some of you in Sunday morning had felt that, like, man, the cost seems really high if I'm to really agree with the scriptures on these issues, and I'm not ready to do that. And why isn't it like that for you? And I think what I would just want to add to that conversation is, it is like that for me and for everybody. And in fact, it's a wild misunderstanding and misrepresentation of the gospel message to say anything less than Jesus is calling us all to die. He's calling us all to, like Rodney has said, side against ourselves and our flesh and side with him. And if that doesn't feel hard for you in your sort of heteronormative world, then I would say you are not applying the gospel properly.
There's probably some deaths that you're resisting as well then.
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that, sadly, I think the culture can be set up where sometimes it can be easier to live with a sense of complacency about those deaths if you are much more of the heterosexual person just operating inside of a church space.
Yeah.
Well, it makes me think of Jerry Bridges' book, Respectable Sins.
Absolutely.
That we all have these little pet sins that we feel like are part of how we're wired. That I'm just prone to anger, or I
tell it like it is.
And we rename them as part of who we are, and then when the scriptures call us to do something else, we make excuses, and we have a way that has become acceptable and normal within our culture, our little Christian culture. But it is not right for us to look at another person and call them to take that big step of death, pick up their cross, when we're not doing it ourselves. And so even as I think about approaching the trans community, the LGBT community, I'm always thinking, Lord, help me pull the log out of my own eye. Where am I not dying in these ways? And if I will pick up my own cross that way, then when I look at someone else and go, come on with me, follow Christ, it'll cost you everything. It's already cost me everything. Now my words actually carry some weight because they're seeing me die to that in my own life.
Well, and I would just say, I think for all of us up here, these are personal for us. There's relationships behind this conversation for all of us, people that we love. So it's not just theology in the abstract, but it's life and it's real. And I think on that side too, I would just say, I think we live in such an over-sexualized culture to where the culture can preach and be so loud that the truest thing about you is your sexuality. And starting from the foundation, the truest thing about all of us is that we're a child of God and a follower of Jesus. And in that following of Jesus, there are going to be so many deaths as we pick up our cross and deny ourselves daily. But the culture is just going to say, man, how could I ever give up my sexuality or change my sexuality? Even if you're a heterosexual, and it's just like, hey, you need to stop committing adultery. You need to stop sleeping around, or sex before marriage, or pornography. Those are deaths that you should be engaging in there as well.
You bet.
So.
I know we're about out of time, but wanted to make a couple of observations from Sunday that were helpful for me. One is, I think, connecting all three of these issues, complementarianism, homosexuality, and transgenderism, to the Trinity is the most helpful way to talk about and frame how the Bible is addressing each of these things. I had a friend, it's probably 6 months ago maybe, who in passing said, I think the thing we're missing in addressing all these is a robust Trinitarian theology. And as I've read and just kind of lived in Genesis 1 over the last few months, I believe that more and more, that it's the thing so often missing in how Christians are talking about these issues in our lives. So I wanted just to commend that and to say that. I think that is a really good connecting point to these issues, and developing in our theology in that area is so helpful as we're talking about this. Then the second thing is I wanted just to make a comment, because I'm actually glad my kids sat in that sermon on Sunday. So I have a 14-year-old now, and a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old in my house. And if my kids were 3 or 4 or 5 years younger, I would have loved for them to have sat through that sermon. And I just wanted to make an appeal to anyone that's listening to think about how these issues are interacting with your parenting. We just live in a world right now where the option of keeping your kids from these types of issues and conversations is no longer an option.
Yeah.
So Disney has just sort of stated their strategy in convincing the world of all of these things is we're just going to tell beautiful stories that normalize and make beautiful these things. So the option of sequestering your kids and quarantining them from these issues just isn't going to work.
not on the table.
So I just wanted to say to you and the people listening, these are issues as parents you have got to platform and to begin to build a robust way of seeing the world and the Bible and listening to the voice of God in the scriptures. We have got to do a good job of platforming those conversations starting way earlier than we think in our homes.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
good.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Okay, that is it for our first installment of Sunday Plus.
there you go.
We did it. We
Yeah.
really did it.
Nice.
It
Hey,
happened.
thanks for joining us for this. Hopefully there'll be more to come. Hope this was helpful for you. And thanks again, guys. God bless
Yeah.
you.
Blessings.